Hello, I'm Peter. I'm so glad you could join me for tonight's journey. And tonight, that journey leads us back to a specific kind of solitude that existed between 1830 and 1860. It was the solitude of 3,000 men scattered across the vast spine of the Rocky Mountains. They lived in a world where the thermometer could shatter at 40 below, and where months of isolation meant your own thoughts were your loudest companion. The statistics were grim. 1 in 5 would succumb to the elements or starvation, yet thousands returned year after year. Why? What peace did they find in that deadly cold? Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. September 1837. A nameless valley carved deep into the Rocky Mountains, 70 miles from the nearest trading post. This is where we find Ethan Caldwell, a man of 28 winters, though the mountains have aged him in ways that numbers cannot measure. 3 years ago, he walked away from the steel mills of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where the heat was unbearable and the air tasted of iron and coal dust. He came west, searching for something the city could never provide: silence that wasn't broken by machinery space, that wasn't measured in work shifts, freedom that tasted like creek water and wood smoke. But every freedom demands its price. Ethan's currency is measured in cordwood, stacked high in beaver pelts, stretched and dried in solitude, so complete that sometimes he forgets the sound of his own name. The elevation here sits just above 8,000 feet. The air moves differently at this height, thinner and sharper, burning your lungs if you breathe too deeply during exertion. The lodgepole pines grow in dense stands, their trunks rising straight and true, like nature's own cathedral pillars. Their needles whisper constantly in the breeze, speaking in a dialect older than any human language. September brings the aspens into their brief glory leaves, transforming to gold so bright it hurts to look at them directly when the sun hits just right. It's a final, defiant beauty before winter arrives to strip everything down to essentials. Ethan's cabins occupies a slight rise above a creek that runs year-round, fed by snowmelt from peaks he's never bothered naming. The structure measures roughly 14 feet by 16, built from pine logs. He cut himself, each one notched and fitted with the kind of precision that means survival. The gaps between logs are chinked with moss harvested from the north sides of trees, mixed with clay from the creek bank, and deer hair left over from his tanning work. The roof consists of split pine shakes, overlapped and weighted down with river stones, because wind at this elevation can peel a roof away like skin from an overripe fruit. One window, small and south-facing, covered with oiled deerskin that transmits light while keeping out the worst of the weather. The door hangs on leather hinges, thick planks that required 2 days of careful work to shape and fit properly. Metal hinges would contract in the cold, work themselves loose, fail at the worst possible moment. Inside, everything serves a purpose. A stone fireplace built into the north wall, its chimney constructed from river rocks, fitted together with clay mortar. A sleeping platform raised 3 feet off the floor, where cold air settles like an invisible pool. A rough table made from split logs. 2 sections of tree trunk for chairs. Shelves holding supplies. Cornmeal in a sealed tin beans in a leather bag. Salt pork wrapped in cloth coffee beans. in a glass jar and one small crock of molasses. He rations like liquid gold. His traps hang from wooden pegs driven between logs. A Pennsylvania-made flintlock rifle stands in the corner, always loaded, always within reach of where he sleeps. This cabin is more than shelter. It's fortress, sanctuary, and prison cell all at once. Mountain men who survive their first winter in the Rocky Mountains understand something that cannot be taught, only learned through experience that sometimes kills the student. Preparation is not merely important, it is sacred. Between 1830 and 1860, approximately 3,000 men worked as beaver trappers in these mountains. The mathematics of survival were brutal. 1 man in 5 never descended from the high country. The wilderness absorbed them, turned their bones to dust, and their names to cautionary tales whispered around rendezvous fires. Ethan has witnessed the cost of carelessness. 2 winters past, he discovered what remained of Zebulon Pike, a man from Ohio, who shared a name with a famous explorer, but possessed none of the explorer's luck. Zeb had chosen a cave higher on the mountainside, thinking to save time by avoiding cabin construction. Ethan found him in late March, frozen in a sitting position, arms wrapped around his knees, eyes still open and staring at the cave entrance where rescue would never arrive. His firewood supply had run empty in January. After that, it became merely a question of how long a human body could maintain warmth without external heat. The answer, not long enough. Another man, Hiram Scott, made his fatal error traveling during a blizzard, became separated from his partner, and broke through creek ice into water that was cold enough to stop a heart in minutes. They found him the following spring, one hand frozen in the gesture of reaching for the bank he never quite managed to reach. Then there was Luke Hall, who survived 2 Rocky Mountain winters, only to grow complacent around a grizzly sow protecting cubs. That death at least came quickly. Cold is far less merciful. These stories circulate among mountain men not for entertainment, but for education. Each death contains a lesson. Each mistake teaches those who survive how not to die. When September arrives and aspen leaves ignite into gold, a mountain man begins his preparations. This work is not optional. This is warfare against an enemy that never sleeps and never negotiates. Wood comes first. Always wood. 20 full days of cutting dawn to dusk to accumulate sufficient fuel for 5 months of winter. This isn't guesswork. It's mathematics written in frozen corpses. A cabin fire burning from October through March consumes approximately 15 logs daily to maintain livable temperature. Some days require more when wind drives cold through every gap. Some days allow slightly less if a man is willing to huddle in his blankets and let the cold press closer. But 15 logs represents the average, and averages keep you alive. Ethan works in a rhythm that becomes almost meditative. The axe rises and falls, rises and falls. Each strike bites into wood that's been seasoning on the stumps standing dead trees that contain minimal moisture. Green wood is the enemy. Green wood hisses, and smokes produces more frustration than heat fills a cabin with acrid smoke that makes eyes water and lungs burn. Dead-standing timber dried by sun and wind over multiple seasons burns clean and hot. He cuts each log to 16 inches a length, determined by his firebox dimensions. Too long, and they won't fit properly. Too short, and they burn too fast. Then comes splitting. Lodgepole pine, despite its straight growth, often contains twisted grain patterns that fight the wedge. His hands blister, then callus, then blister again through the calluses. His shoulders ache constantly. His lower back protests every morning. He ignores all of it because the alternative to ignoring it is dying in February. By the time his woodpile stands complete, it measures 8 feet high, 12 feet long, and 4 feet deep. A fortress of fuel, a wooden barrier between himself and hypothermia. He covers the stack with pine boughs to shed rain and snow, then weights the boughs with stones. Wet wood is merely frozen wood waiting to betray you. Chinking comes next. Summer's heat causes cabin logs to shrink slightly, opening gaps that winter wind will exploit with ruthless efficiency. Ethan mixes creek clay with dried moss animal hair, saved from his tanning work, and small pebbles, creating a mortar that proves surprisingly durable. He works methodically, filling every crack, every crevice, every possible entry point. On the exterior, his chinking is rough and functional. On the interior, he smooths it carefully because rough surfaces catch and tear blankets in the dark. The roof receives special attention. He climbs up with fresh pine shakes, thin splits of wood that overlap like fish scales, and replaces any that show cracks or warping. Then, he weights them with flat stones, creating a heavy barrier capable of bearing winter's snow load without collapse. A roof failure in January means death. There's no rebuilding in blizzard conditions. There's only freezing. His window, that single concession to wanting visual connection with the outside world, gets double coverage. Fresh deerskin stretched tight over the frame, scraped thin enough to transmit light, then oiled with rendered bear fat until it becomes translucent and weather-resistant. Later, when true cold arrives, he'll add a layer of oiled paper, creating an insulating air gap. It's not glass, but glass is for people who face winter as inconvenience rather than enemy. The door undergoes inspection and maintenance. Leather hinges get rubbed with bear fat to maintain suppleness. The bar that drops across the inside, securing the door against wind and whatever else the darkness might send, is tested repeatedly. This bar is the difference between shelter and exposure. Food represents another form of preparation, and here Ethan transforms into both hunter and hoarder. September and October offer the year's best hunting. Elk descend from high country fat from summer grazing in alpine meadows, where the grass grows thick and rich. A single bull elk properly field-dressed yields 200 pounds of meat. Ethan takes 3 over the course of October, working methodically. He shoots field dresses quarters and hauls his shoulders, screaming under loads that would break a weaker man. The meat must be preserved. Simply hanging it invites every predator within miles to come investigate. Once temperatures drop permanently below, freezing frozen meat becomes its own problem, essentially a rock that's impossible to cook properly. Burn the outside while the inside remains frozen solid. Instead, Ethan makes jerky. Thin strips of meat cut with the grain rubbed with precious salt, hung on racks over a smoky fire that burns for days. The smoke from green willow and pine creates a preservative barrier, while heat draws out moisture. The finished product has the texture of leather and tastes like salted wood, but it will keep for months without spoiling. More critically, it can be eaten without cooking a vital advantage if his fire dies and cannot be quickly relit. He also hunts smaller game, rabbits taken in snares, grouse shot with his rifle, providing variety and fresh meat during autumn's early weeks. But once deep winter settles, even small animals become scarce. They burrow underground or fly south, following instincts that humans had to learn through harsh experience. By late October, the cabin stands ready. Wood stacked high, walls sealed tight, food stored and preserved, rifle cleaned and loaded, traps repaired and waiting. Everything that can be done has been done. And then Ethan waits. First snow typically arrives in early November. Not the killing snow, not yet. First snow comes gently, almost apologetically. Large flakes drift down through pine branches, settling on ground that's still warm enough to melt them. It's beautiful in a way that makes your chest ache. Peaceful. A reminder that not every aspect of winter is hostile. But beneath that beauty runs a message clear as spoken words. You are alone now. The trails are closing. The passes are filling. No one will come until spring. Ethan stands in his doorway that first evening of snowfall, watching the world transform from color to monochrome. Aspen gold fades to gray. Pine green darkens to black. The sky becomes a low, featureless ceiling that seems to press down with physical weight. He steps back inside, bars the door, adds 3 logs to the fire more than strictly necessary. But tonight, he can afford generosity. Warmth pushes back against cold seeping through log walls. He sits on his sleeping platform, pulls a wool blanket around his shoulders, and watches flames dance and flicker. Outside, snow continues its quiet work of erasure. Winter has begun. When sealed against the night, the cabin becomes a universe complete unto itself. A pocket of warmth and firelight carved from darkness and cold that extends in every direction for miles beyond measure. Ethan moves through his evening routine with the precision of ritual. Ritual matters. Ritual keeps the mind engaged when isolation threatens to let it drift. Ritual provides structure when the identical repetition of winter days threatens to blur them into one endless grey sameness. Fire first. Always fire. The relationship between a mountain man and his fire transcends simple utility. This isn't merely a heat source. It's a living thing that requires constant attention, feeding, and respect. Neglect it, and you die. It's that immediate, that absolute. Ethan has learned to read fire the way some men read printed words. Flame color tells stories. Blue-white means clean, hot combustion. Yellow-orange indicates steady, reliable heat. Dull red signals dying coals that need immediate attention. Sound matters equally. A healthy fire crackles and pops as resin pockets superheat and explode. A struggling fire hisses and spits, fighting moisture it shouldn't contain. Tonight's fire burns well. 3 logs arranged in a triangle, their ends meeting in the center where coals glow brightest. This configuration maximizes heat output while controlling burn rate. The logs will last approximately 4 hours before requiring replacement, which means Ethan must wake twice during the night to feed them. Once around midnight, once near dawn. Let the fire die and cold floods in within minutes. Interior temperature can drop 30 degrees in an hour once the heat source fails. Relighting from scratch using flint and steel is possible, but time-consuming, anxiety-producing, and wasteful of energy better conserved for other tasks. More critically, once the fire dies, the cabin's thermal mass begins radiating its stored heat outward. Recapturing that warmth requires hours, so the fire never dies. Not if you value survival, but fire carries its own dangers. Carbon monoxide, the invisible killer, has claimed more mountain men than bear attacks and blizzards combined. When wood burns incompletely, it produces carbon monoxide alongside carbon dioxide. In a sealed space, these gases accumulate to lethal concentrations without producing warning beyond drowsiness and headache symptoms easily mistaken for simple fatigue. Ethan's solution employs ancient wisdom-controlled ventilation. His chimney draws well-pulling smoke and combustion gases upward and outward. But he also maintains a small gap beneath the door, perhaps a quarter-inch wedged open with a carefully shaped stick. Fresh air seeps in along the floor, while warm, contaminated air rises and escapes through the chimney. It's cold air. Yes, seemingly counterintuitive when you're trying to stay warm. But it's the difference between safe sleep and never waking. The cabin divides itself into thermal zones without any visible boundaries. Near the fireplace, heat is almost oppressive. You cannot sit too close for extended periods without skin beginning to prickle and redden. 3 feet back, temperature becomes comfortable, almost pleasant. 6 feet back, it's cool but manageable. At the far wall, 15 feet from flames, it's cold enough that exhaled breath creates visible mist. Ethan's sleeping platform occupies the middle zone, positioned through careful trial and error. Too close to fire means sweating during sleep, which soaks clothing and blankets with moisture that becomes dangerous once the fire burns lower. Too far means shivering all night, never achieving the deep rest that only warmth permits. The middle position represents compromise, and survival speaks the language of compromise fluently. The platform itself rises 3 feet above the floor for sound physical reasons. Cold air being denser than warm air sinks. Always. The floor, despite being packed dirt covered with pine needles and a bearskin rug, remains the coldest part of the cabin. Sleeping directly on it would mean waking, if you woke at all, with cold settled into bones, like an ache that never fully departs. Platform construction uses rough-cut pine planks laid across a sturdy frame. No nails, just wooden pegs and notched joints, because metal contracts in cold and can work loose. Atop the planks sits a thick mattress tick stuffed with straw and dried moss, providing both insulation and some small cushioning against hard wood. But the real genius resides in the layering above the mattress. This is where centuries of accumulated wilderness wisdom manifests knowledge passed orally from veteran to novice, tested against the unforgiving laboratory of winter nights. First layer buffalo hide hair side down. The thick, coarse hair traps air, creating an insulating barrier against the mattress. Buffalo evolved over millennia to survive Great Plains winters that rival the Rockies for brutal cold. Their hides retain those evolutionary advantages even after the animal's death. Second layer. 3 wool blankets traded at last summer's rendezvous for beaver pelts. Wool performs miracles. It insulates even when damp resists burning and improves with age as fibers compact and felt together. Each blanket weighs roughly 4 pounds. 3 blankets properly layered can sustain life at temperatures well below 0. Third layer, another buffalo hide this time, hair side up. This creates a second air-trapping layer and provides weight. Weight matters more than most people realize. A weighted blanket presses down, eliminates air gaps, creates a sealed microclimate. It's also psychologically comforting, a constant gentle pressure that signals safety to your nervous system. Yet even this comprehensive system has limits. On the coldest nights when exterior temperatures plunge to 20-30, even 40 below 0, additional measures become necessary. Ethan keeps river stones near the fire. These are selected carefully. Certain rocks contain trapped moisture that can explosively convert to steam when heated, sending shrapnel across the cabin. River stones worn smooth by centuries of water action are generally safe. He places 3 or 4 at the fire's edge, just before bed, letting them absorb heat until they're too hot for bare-handed contact, then wraps each in multiple cloth layers. These wrapped stones enter the bed strategically, one at his feet, one near his core, sometimes one between his thighs, where major blood vessels run close to skin surface. The stones radiate heat for hours, warming the microenvironment inside his blanket layers. By morning, they're cold, but by morning, the fire is built high again, and fresh stones can be prepared if needed. The system works. Uncomfortable, certainly. Far from ideal, absolutely. But effective enough to sustain life through months when the outside world becomes actively hostile to human existence. His sleeping clothes are equally calculated. Too many layers means perspiration, which means damp fabric, which means waking cold and miserable. Too few layers means shivering all night, burning calories his body cannot spare. He settles on wool undershirt, wool long underwear, thick wool socks. The wool scratches smells of lanolin and smoke, but it keeps him breathing. On particularly cold nights, he adds a wool cap pulled low over his ears. A surprising amount of body heat escapes through the head. The cap makes the difference between tolerable and miserable. Around the cabin's interior, other survival elements occupy carefully chosen positions. Boots stand near the fire, but not too close. Leather must dry from daily wear, but excessive heat makes it brittle. His rifle leans in the corner, always loaded, always ready. Not because he expects nighttime threats, but because unpreparedness, even once, can prove fatal. Water presents constant challenge. The creek outside freezes solid by December, requiring him to chop through ice to reach running water underneath. This is exhausting, dangerous work. Slip and fall through into current, and you have perhaps 2 minutes to escape reach shelter and strip wet clothes before hypothermia becomes irreversible. Instead, Ethan keeps a large cast-iron pot near the fire, filled with snow that melts slowly into water. It takes roughly 10 inches of snow to produce 1 inch of water, a shockingly inefficient transformation. But it's safer than daily ice-chopping expeditions that grow more dangerous as winter deepens. Food storage occupies the cabin's coldest section along the north wall, where firelight barely reaches. Frozen jerky cornmeal beans, salt pork, all gradually become rock-hard as temperature drops. He learns to plan meals hours in advance, moving frozen items closer to heat so they thaw slowly. Rush the thawing process, and meat weeps out all its moisture, becoming even tougher and less palatable. Coffee is precious luxury. He rations it carefully, 1 cup in morning, 1 in evening. The beans are roasted dark ground, with a hand mill boiled in water that tastes faintly of pine from the bark-lined pot. The resulting brew is bitter strong and utterly glorious. Its warmth and civilization and normalcy all mixed together in a tin cup that pleasantly burns his hands when he holds it. As darkness settles completely outside, the cabin becomes a tiny island of light in an ocean of absolute black. Through his deerskin-covered window, Ethan can see nothing. No stars, no moon, just the complete absence that is mountain darkness. People who've only experienced city darkness cannot understand true dark. True dark is absolute. It's a presence rather than absence, something that presses against windows and door, testing for weakness. Inside, firelight creates dancing shadows across log walls. The shadows of his hands magnified and distorted gesture wildly when he reaches for his coffee. The shadow of drying jerky hanging from rafters sways gently in thermal currents, looking disturbingly like a line of hanged men. He deliberately avoids dwelling on that image. The cabin speaks its own language through sound. Fire pops and crackles. Logs in walls contract with cold, producing sharp reports like distant gunshots. Wind finds every tiny gap in chinking and whistles through creating a variable chorus that sometimes sounds almost musical. His breathing, the scrape of spoon against tin plate, the rustle of fabric when he moves. These sounds become familiar, expected, which means unfamiliar sounds. A scraping outside the door, the snap of a twig under weight, a low animal sound from darkness, produce instant alertness. Survival depends on knowing when something is wrong. But tonight, nothing is wrong. Tonight is simply another evening in a long chain of evenings stretching until spring. Ethan finishes his simple meal, cornmeal mush with jerky strip flavored with salt and nothing else, and sets his plate aside for morning washing. Water is too precious to waste on dishes at night. He adds another log to the fire, watches it catch, and begins final preparations for sleep. Rifle checked one more time, powder dry flint, sharp pan clean. Doorbar tested, seated firmly. Fire arranged for slow burning. Heated rocks wrapped and positioned. Finally, Ethan climbs into his layered bed, pulls buffalo hide to his chin, and feels its weight settle like an embrace. The cabin creaks and pops around him. Fire whispers its eternal monologue. Cold presses against walls, patient and persistent. But here, in this small, defended space, there is warmth. There is shelter. There is survival. For tonight, that's enough. Understanding cold isn't optional in the Rocky Mountains. It's the fundamental education that separates the living from the frozen dead. Cold, in pure physical terms, is simply heat's absence. But that clinical definition fails to capture cold's lived reality, the way it infiltrates and transforms everything, the way it becomes a tangible presence rather than mere absence. Tonight, as Ethan lies in his bed, listening to wind, exterior temperature drops steadily. By midnight, it will reach 20 below zero Fahrenheit. By dawn, if the sky stays clear, it could touch 30 below. These numbers remain abstract until you understand their impact on a human body struggling to survive. The human body operates within a remarkably narrow temperature range. Core body temperature must stay between 97 and 99 degrees to function normally. Drop below 95 and hypothermia begins a cascading failure that starts with shivering and confusion and ends with death if unchecked. The body's mechanisms for generating heat, metabolizing food, shivering, constricting blood vessels to reduce heat loss, are sophisticated but limited. They can buy time. They cannot indefinitely overcome extreme cold. This is why shelter transcends comfort. It's about creating a microclimate where the body's heat generation mechanisms can match heat loss. The cabin, despite its rudimentary construction, achieves this balance through principles that wouldn't be formally described by physics for another century, but which mountain men understood intuitively through experience, written in corpses. Log walls, each 10 inches thick, provide significant insulation. Wood has an R value of approximately 1.0 per inch, meaning 10 inches of pine creates an R10 barrier. Not spectacular by modern standards, but sufficient when combined with other elements. Chinking fills gaps that would otherwise create convective heat loss, where warm air escapes and cold air infiltrates. The roof sheds snow before it can accumulate to dangerous weight, while providing another insulating layer. But the real thermal magic occurs in the air itself. The cabin's interior volume, roughly 3,000 cubic feet, contains air that fire continuously heats. Warm air rises, creating circulation. Cold air enters through the intentional gap under the door, gets heated by fire, rises to ceiling, then gradually cools and descends along the far wall. This convective loop distributes heat throughout the space, preventing formation of dead zones where cold can accumulate. It's inefficient by modern standards. Most of the fire's heat escapes straight up the chimney. But efficiency isn't the goal. Survival is. And for survival, a burning fire infinitely exceeds any theoretical perfect system that might fail. Outside, cold's physics play out on larger, more dramatic scale. Temperature inversion is common in mountain valleys at night. Cold air, being denser than warm air, sinks into valley bottoms and pools there like invisible water. This can create situations where the valley floor is 30 below, while slopes just a few hundred feet higher are 20 degrees warmer. Ethan's cabin, positioned on a slight rise above the creek, benefits from this effect. Down in the valley bottom, where cold air collects in a deep, stagnant pool, temperatures reach deadly extremes. The clear sky overhead, beautiful during day when sun creates diamonds. From snow crystals becomes a liability at night. With no cloud cover to reflect heat back to ground, the Earth radiates its warmth directly into space. It's called radiative cooling, and it can drop temperatures 10 to 15 degrees below what they'd be under overcast sky. Paradoxically, clouds keep you warmer at night by acting as an insulating blanket. Wind changes everything. A 20 below night with calm air is survivable even outside for a short time if properly dressed. But add 15 miles per hour of wind, and the wind chill equivalent drops to 50 below. Wind strips away the thin layer of warm air your body tries to maintain against your skin, forcing metabolism to work overtime replacing it. Wind finds every gap in clothing, every opening in shelter. Wind doesn't just make cold worse, it transforms cold into something actively malicious. Tonight, wind hammers the cabin. Ethan hears it in constant pressure against the north wall, in the way the door trembles against its bar, despite being firmly latched. Occasionally, a gust hits with enough force that the entire structure shudders slightly, logs groaning in their notches. The wind chill outside isn't just cold. It's a killing force that would strip life from exposed flesh in minutes. But he knows this wind. He's learned to distinguish between different types of mountain wind. There's the steady pushing wind from high peaks, cold but predictable. There's the swirling, confused wind that precedes storms, constantly changing direction. And there's the really dangerous wind, the Chinook, also called the snow eater. The Chinook is a warm wind paradoxically created when Pacific moisture crosses mountain ranges, loses its moisture as snow on the windward side, then descends the leeward side as hot, dry air. A Chinook can raise temperatures 50 degrees in hours, turning winter into spring overnight. It can melt 3 feet of snow in a single day. Sounds wonderful, right? Except Chinooks herald chaos. Rapid melt creates flooding. Sudden temperature change triggers avalanches as snowpack destabilizes. And worst of all, Chinooks are usually followed by brutal cold snaps as Arctic air rushes in to fill the void. You get a few days of false spring. Let your guard down, maybe use extra firewood because it feels safe to be warm. And then cold returns harder than before. Ethan has learned not to trust warmth. Cold is honest. Cold tells you exactly what it is and what it will do. Warmth lies. The other weather phenomenon he watches for is the whiteout, a condition where falling or blowing snow becomes so dense that visibility drops to zero. Whiteouts disorient beyond anything people who haven't experienced them can imagine. Sky and ground become indistinguishable. All sense of direction vanishes. You can get lost 10 feet from your own cabin, wander in circles until exhaustion takes you down, and die within sight of safety you cannot see. The solution is simple. Never go out in whiteouts. Ever. For any reason. If caught outside, stop moving immediately. Dig a snow shelter if possible, and wait. Movement in a whiteout is suicide. Tonight isn't a whiteout, but wind blows snow hard enough that visibility outside would be measured in feet rather than yards. Ethan knows this without looking. He can hear it in the way snow particles hiss against the window, covering in the particular howl wind makes when carrying a heavy load of powder. He also knows from long experience what temperature is doing to his supplies outside. The spare firewood under its protective boughs is fine. Cold doesn't hurt properly seasoned wood. But any metal tools left exposed are becoming dangerous to touch with bare skin. At temperatures below zero, metal becomes cold enough to cause instant frostbite. Touch a shovel handle with bare hand at 30 below and skin can freeze to metal in seconds, pulling away tears off layers of skin. The same is true for water outside. The creek freezes deeper each night, ice thickness growing by inches. Eventually, it will freeze nearly solid with only a narrow channel of running water at the very bottom. Ice is a resource. It can be chopped and melted, but it's also a trap. Break through into water below, and you have perhaps 2 minutes to escape reach shelter and strip wet clothes before hypothermia becomes irreversible. Inside the cabin, Ethan's breath mists visibly despite the fire. This tells him cabin temperature has dropped into the low 50s, warm enough to prevent freezing cold enough to make breathing feel sharp in his lungs. He adds another log to fire, watches it catch, and feels the wave of increased heat push outward. The log transforms as it burns, releasing energy stored as chemical bonds during years of growth. Wood is essentially solidified sunlight solar energy captured through photosynthesis and locked into cellulose structure. Now that energy releases as heat and light, warming a man who never knew the tree when it lived. There's something profound in that cycle, though. Ethan doesn't think in such terms. He just knows wood burns fire, makes heat, and heat keeps you alive. But fire requires oxygen, which is why the tiny gap under the door matters so much. Seal the cabin completely, and fire will literally suffocate, using up all available oxygen and producing nothing but smoke and carbon monoxide. The gap allows fresh air to seep in, feeding fire, keeping combustion clean and complete. It's a delicate balance. Too much air and fire burns too fast, consuming wood at unsustainable rates. Too little, and fire dies or becomes dangerous. Ethan has learned to calibrate this balance through experience. He knows by flame color, by air, feel by some indefinable sixth sense whether fire is burning correctly. It's a skill that can't be taught, only learned through winter after winter of close attention. Snow outside accumulates steadily. By morning, there will be another 6 inches atop yesterday's snowfall and yesterday's snow atop the day before's. The snowpack builds layer upon layer each snowfall, creating a distinct stratum that tells a story about conditions when it fell. Light, powdery snow from cold, clear nights. Heavy, wet snow from warmer, cloudy periods. Thin ice crusts where melting and refreezing occurred. This snowpack is both resource and danger. It insulates ground-protecting plant roots and hibernating animals from worst cold. It stores water for spring runoff, but it also accumulates weight on cabin roofs, threatening collapse if it gets too heavy. It makes travel increasingly difficult, then impossible. And it buries everything landmarks trails, even memories of what summer landscape looked like. Ethan has markers, tall poles stuck in ground at strategic points that will remain visible even under deep snow, allowing him to find his way from cabin to woodpile to creek, even in complete whiteout. These markers are life-saving infrastructure, as important as the cabin itself. As night deepens, cold intensifies. This is dangerous time, the hours between midnight and dawn, when temperatures drop to daily minimums. Fire must be fed. Sleep must be managed in intervals allowing for fire tending. Cold must be respected always, every moment, because cold never sleeps, and cold never stops testing your defenses for weakness. Ethan lies in his layered bed, warm enough for now, listening to wind and thinking about nothing in particular. This is survival, not dramatic, not heroic, just persistent. Just patient maintenance of systems that keep you alive one night at a time. Outside temperature drops another degree, and winter continues its work. Sleep in winter is not the peaceful surrender it is in gentler seasons. It's a negotiated truce with conditions that would kill you if you truly let your guard down. Ethan's sleeping system, as we've seen, is elaborate layers of hides, blankets, heated stones. But sleep's psychology is equally complex. You must get warm enough to sleep deeply, because shallow sleep doesn't adequately restore the body. But you cannot get so warm that you sweat, because moisture in bedding is a death sentence delayed. The art lies in finding that precise middle ground. He's learned to pay attention to his body's signals. When he first enters bed, cold is a physical presence. The blankets feel like sheets of ice until his body heat begins warming the microenvironment. This initial phase is uncomfortable sometimes, almost unbearable. Muscles tense involuntarily, trying to generate heat through shivering. Breathing becomes shallow and fast. His feet, always the coldest extremities, feel like blocks of wood. This is normal. This is expected. The key is not to panic, not to thrash around generating motion that disrupts blanket layers and lets precious warm air escape. Instead, Ethan lies very still, pulls his knees up slightly toward his chest to minimize surface area, and breathes slowly. Just breathes. Lets his body do its work. Heated stones help tremendously in this initial phase. The one near his feet radiates warmth into toes and soles areas, where poor circulation makes self-warming difficult. The stone near his core, positioned carefully at his lower back, warms large muscles, there helping them relax. Relaxed muscles use less oxygen, generate heat more efficiently, and don't ache as much come morning. After perhaps 15 minutes of careful stillness, the transition occurs. His body heat, trapped by layers, begins to accumulate. Blankets warm. Buffalo hide becomes flexible rather than stiff. His feet start to feel like feet again, instead of distant objects attached to legs. Breathing deepens. Cold retreats to blanket edges held at bay by his body's thermal output. This is the moment when sleep becomes possible. But there's a narrow window. If he waits too long, if he generates too much heat, sweat begins. It starts subtly slight dampness at hairline under arms, at the small of his back, where the heated stone creates extra warmth. If not corrected immediately, this dampness spreads. Wool, for all its virtues, has limits. Wet wool still insulates, yes, but not nearly as well as dry wool. And more critically, wet clothing saps heat from your body continuously through evaporative cooling. So Ethan monitors himself constantly, even as he drifts towards sleep. Too warm. He carefully peels back one blanket layer, exposing himself slightly to cabin air until his skin cools. Too cold. He pulls layers tighter, adjusts buffalo hide to eliminate gaps. It's continuous calibration, and he's become expert through necessity. Sleep's quality itself is different in winter. In summer, Ethan could sleep deeply for 8 or 9 hours straight, waking naturally with dawn. In winter, this kind of deep, uninterrupted sleep is dangerous. Fire must be tended every few hours, which means getting out of bed into cold that hits like a physical blow, rebuilding fire, and returning to bed to restart the warming process. Some mountain men try to avoid this by loading their fires with huge logs designed to burn all night. This sometimes works. It also sometimes kills them when a large log rolls out of the fireplace onto the cabin floor and sets everything ablaze. Ethan knows of 3 men who died that way, trapped in burning cabins in the middle of winter with nowhere to run, because outside was even deadlier than flames. So he wakes. Twice a night, like clockwork, his internal sense of time, honed by months of this routine, pulls him from sleep. The first waking is always hardest. The cabin has cooled significantly. His body is heavy with sleep, reluctant to move. But he forces himself up, swings legs out from under covers, and gasps as cold air hits exposed skin. The process of tending fire is quick by necessity. He's laid out everything in advance. Fire poker, new logs within arm's reach, tinder ready if needed. He rakes coals, adds split wood weights just long enough to ensure it catches, then retreats back to bed. Total elapsed time 3 minutes. It feels like an hour. The second waking near dawn is easier because his body knows morning is coming. There's a psychological difference between waking in the deep middle of night, when darkness and cold seem eternal, and waking to tend fire when dawn is perhaps an hour away. The second time, he often stays up, adding multiple logs to build fire-high starting water to boil for coffee, beginning his morning routine. But between these wakings, when sleep does come, it has a particular quality. Dreams in winter are vivid, often bizarre. Some scientists would later explain this as a function of mild hypoxia. Cabin air, while not dangerously low in oxygen, is certainly lower than outside air would be, and brain responds to slight oxygen deficit with unusually active dreaming. Ethan doesn't know this explanation. He just knows winter dreams are strange, often disturbing, sometimes beautiful. He dreams of the steel mill where he used to work, but in the dream, the mill is buried in snow and ice, frozen workers standing like statues at their stations. He dreams of walking through summer meadows, only to have them transform into snow-covered expanses with each step. He dreams of fire that gives no heat cold, that speaks with a voice wolves with human eyes. Most troubling are dreams where he's lost, struggling through deep snow, unable to find the cabin. He can see it in the distance, just a dark shape against white. But no matter how he walks, it never gets closer. These dreams wake him with heart pounding, and he has to look around the cabin, verify that he's actually here, actually safe, before his heart rate settles. The psychological literature on isolation and extreme environments wouldn't be written for another 100 years. But Ethan is living the research. Prolonged isolation, constant mild stress, disrupted sleep patterns all affect the mind in measurable ways. Some men handle it better than others. Some men go quietly mad in ways that don't become apparent until spring, when they emerge from their cabins and can't quite remember how to talk to other people. Ethan fights this by maintaining mental discipline. He counts things. He recites poetry memorized as a child. He talks out loud to himself, not in the rambling way of madness, but in clear, structured sentences about what he's doing and why. Now I'm adding wood to fire because flames are getting low. Now I'm checking doorbar because wind is strong tonight. The sound of his own voice, calm and rational, reminds him that he's still sane, still functional, still himself. He also maintains a calendar, scratching marks on a log to track days. This might seem unnecessary. What does the specific date matter when you're isolated in a cabin? But it does matter psychologically. Knowing that today is December 14th, rather than just another winter day, provides structure, orientation, a connection to the larger human world beyond these mountains. It reminds him that time is still moving forward, that winter will end, that this situation is temporary rather than eternal. The physical aspects of sleep are equally important. The sleeping platform must stay dry. This means any wet clothes, and everything gets wet eventually from snow, from air's humidity, must be dried near fire before being stored. Wet items on or near sleeping platform introduce moisture that accumulates over weeks, eventually making the whole sleeping area damp and cold. Ethan has learned to check his bedding regularly, pulling apart layers during sunny days to air them out. Buffalo hides in particular need attention. The leather can develop musty smell if kept damp too long, and must occasionally be moved outside in sun, when there is sun, to dry and deodorize. His own body hygiene is another constant battle. In summer, he bathed regularly in the creek. In winter, creek is frozen, and bathing is essentially impossible. The best he can do is heat water wash key areas with a cloth and change his wool underwear occasionally. This is why wool is critical. It can absorb a remarkable amount of sweat and body oils before it stops functioning as insulation. Cotton would become disgusting and useless within days, but wool still develops an odor over time. By midwinter, everything in the cabin, his clothes, his bedding, his own body, smells of wood smoke, animal fat, sweat, and general funkiness. He barely notices anymore. The human nose adapts quickly to constant smells. If another person walked into his cabin, they'd be nearly overwhelmed by the thick, complex odor. To Ethan, it's just the smell of winter. Lice and fleas are potential problems in these conditions, though cold actually helps. Lice struggle to survive in cold environments, and the cabin, while warm enough for human survival, is often too cold for lice to thrive. Still, Ethan checks his hair and body regularly, and wool clothing gets turned inside out and frozen periodically, which kills any insects hiding in fibers. These aren't pleasant topics, but they're the reality of winter survival. Comfort is a luxury. Warmth is a necessity. Cleanliness falls somewhere in between, important for health, but negotiable in ways that heat is not. As dawn approaches and cabin's darkness shifts from complete black to merely very dark grey, Ethan wakes for the last time. This waking is almost pleasant. He's made it through another night. Fire has stayed lit. Cold has been held at bay. These small victories accumulate day by day into the larger victory of survival. He stretches carefully under blankets, feeling his spine pop and release tension. His shoulders ache. They always ache in winter, from constant small hunching against cold. His hands are stiff joints protesting as he flexes fingers. His feet are cold despite the heated stone, which has long since released its warmth into fabric around it. But he's alive, healthy, functional. That's enough. The evening routine is sacred. Not in any spiritual sense, but in the sense that its consistent execution means the difference between waking successfully tomorrow or not waking at all. Ethan begins his preparations as last natural light fades from the window. This timing is deliberate. Tasks done in full darkness are harder, more dangerous, and consume lamp oil, a precious resource he hoards for emergencies. First, he secures the perimeter. This means checking door bar, ensuring it's seated properly in its brackets. A door that blows open during night lets cold flood in immediately and can extinguish fire within minutes. Leather hinges get quick examination. Are they still supple? Any sign of cracking? He runs fingers along door's edges, feeling for new gaps where chinking might have fallen out. Window covering gets similar attention. He presses against it, gently checking for tears or looseness. The oiled deerskin is durable, but not invulnerable. A small tear can become large tear very quickly when wind pressure hits it, and replacing the covering requires daylight and relatively mild weather. Next, fire. He builds it up higher than strictly necessary for the moment, creating a reserve of coals that will last through dinner preparation and evening. Logs are arranged in his preferred pattern, 2 large ones parallel, creating a coal bed between them with a smaller piece across the top. This creates maximum flame, maximum coal production, and even heat distribution for cooking. Water situation is assessed. His large pot near fire contains melted snow from earlier in the day. He checks the level enough for coffee in the morning, but he'll need to add more snow tonight before bed, so it's melted and ready by dawn. Fresh snow is added carefully. Add too much at once, and it cools water significantly, wasting heat energy. Food preparation is next. Tonight's meal is simple cornmeal mush, with a strip of jerky, a few dried berries he's hoarded from autumn, and coffee. Cornmeal has to be measured out, first removed from its storage on the cold wall, and brought near fire to warm slightly. Frozen cornmeal clumps and doesn't cook properly. He mixes cornmeal with water in a small pot, creating thick porridge-like consistency. This goes directly onto coals at fire's edge. The pot must be watched carefully. Cornmeal mush burns easily, and a burnt pot is nearly impossible to clean in winter when water is scarce. He stirs constantly with a wooden spoon, watching mixture thicken and bubble. Jerky needs no preparation beyond cutting a strip from the hanging bunch with his knife. He's learned to cut it while it's still somewhat frozen. Warm jerky is tougher and harder to cut. The strip goes into his mouth, where he works it slowly, letting saliva soften the tough, salty meat. Chewing jerky is almost meditative, a slow, rhythmic process that occupies minutes per bite. While he eats, His mind runs through tomorrow's necessary tasks. Woodpile needs to be checked how many days of fuel remain at current consumption rates. Traps need to be visited if weather allows, though winter trapping is more about maintaining appearance of activity than actually catching much. Beaver are sluggish in cold water, less likely to venture out. Cabin itself needs constant small repairs, a chink that's fallen out here, a roof shake that's loosened there. After eating, he cleans his single plate and cup with snow, scrubbing them with a rough cloth until they're reasonably clean. Fire is built back down to sustainable levels, 2 medium logs that will burn steadily for the next few hours. Heated stones are placed into fire's edge, beginning their long process of heat absorption. Then comes personal maintenance. His beard, which he's let grow since autumn specifically for insulation, gets combed with a crude wooden comb he carved himself. The comb pulls out tangles and loose hair, keeping the beard from becoming matted and uncomfortable. His hair gets similar attention. Personal grooming in these conditions isn't about vanity, it's about preventing problems. Matted hair can harbor lice. Tangled beards can develop ice buildup from frozen breath. His boots are examined critically. Leather uppers are checked for crack seams for looseness. Boots are perhaps the single most critical piece of equipment. Lose your boots to wear or damage, and you literally cannot leave cabin without risking frostbite and immobility. He rubs bare fat into leather, working it in with his fingers. Fat waterproofs leather and keeps it supple, preventing brittleness that cold causes. His rifle requires nightly attention. He runs a cloth down barrel, checking for moisture or rust. Lock mechanism gets examined. Flint sharp and properly seated. Frizzen, clean pan dry. A rifle that misfires when you need it is worse than no rifle at all, because it gives you false confidence. His powder horn is checked for moisture. His supply of balls counted. He has 43 lead balls remaining, enough for another month if he's careful with shots. His traps hanging on wall are checked for damage. Springs need to be strong enough to hold a beaver, but not so tight they'll break a beaver's leg completely. A trapped beaver should be alive, but immobilized when he checks the trap. Beaver that die in trap before he arrives can be damaged by other predators or freeze in water, making them difficult to retrieve and reducing pelt quality. Mental tasks come next. This is Ethan's personal addition to routine, and it's what keeps him sane through isolation. He reviews his calendar, scratching another mark for today. He recites multiplication tables, a skill learned in childhood and maintained through repetition. He goes through the alphabet, thinking of a mountain man's term for each letter. A is for axe, B is for beaver, C is for creek. This isn't busy work, it's mental exercise, keeping his mind sharp when isolation threatens to dull it. He allows himself 15 minutes of reading by firelight. He has 3 books carried at great expense from last rendezvous. A Bible, though he's not particularly religious. A collection of Shakespeare plays which he reads for language rather than stories. And an almanac from 1835 that's hopelessly out of date, but contains useful information about agriculture and weather patterns. Tonight, he reads from Shakespeare the words strange and beautiful in cabin silence. To be or not to be, that is the question. The words echo differently up here, where questions of existence are more immediate and less philosophical. To be means maintaining fire. Not to be means failure of preparedness. It's that simple and that absolute. Heated stones are ready. He removes them carefully from fire using 2 sticks as tongs. Touching them directly would mean instant severe burns. Each stone is wrapped in multiple layers of cloth, creating insulated packages that can be safely placed in bed. Fire is adjusted for overnight burning. This is careful calculation. Too much wood means waste and potential danger if a log rolls. Too little means waking to cold cabin and difficult task of rebuilding far from coals that are barely alive. He settles on 2 thick logs positioned to burn slowly. Coal production steady heat, output moderate. Door gap is checked one final time. Still a 1/4 inch. Adequate for ventilation without excessive cold infiltration. Leather hinges are touched still supple. Bar is tested solid. Ethan strips down to his sleeping clothes, wool underwear, shirt, socks. His outer clothes are hung on pegs away from sleeping area, but not so close to fire that they'll dry out too much and become brittle. Damp wool is useless. Overly dry wool loses flexibility and tears easily. Balance is, as always, critical. He climbs onto his sleeping platform, feels cold hit exposed skin like a slap, and burrows quickly into layers. Wrapped hot stones go into their designated positions. Buffalo hide is pulled up and arranged. Weight of blankets settles over him. And then finally, he lies still. This is the most dangerous moment of the day, the transition from activity to rest, when your body temperature drops, when micro mistakes in preparation can compound into major problems hours later. If bedding is wrong, he'll discover it too late to fix easily. If fire isn't set correctly, he'll wake to dangerous cold. If he's left any task undone, a door unsecured, water unfilled, tools misplaced, he'll pay for it in darkness when fixing problems is hardest. But tonight, like most nights, preparation has been thorough. As his body heat begins to accumulate under layers, Ethan feels the shift from tense awareness to relaxed readiness for sleep. Breathing slows. Muscles unclench incrementally. Cabin sounds, fire crackling, wind pressing logs contracting, become white noise rather than signals requiring attention. He thinks briefly about tomorrow, about the next day, about spring that seems impossibly distant but will eventually arrive. He thinks about nothing in particular. He drifts. And sleep comes finally to a man who has earned it through meticulous execution of survival rituals that span from dawn to dark and back again. There is darkness, and then there is winter darkness in the Rocky Mountains. The difference isn't just degree. It's a qualitative shift in what darkness means. In cities, in towns, even in small settlements, darkness is mitigated by human presence. There are other lights visible in windows, other fires burning, other lives being lived simultaneously. Darkness is shared, socialized, made manageable by collective humanity. Here, Ethan's light is the only light. His fire is the only fire. For 70 miles in any direction, he may be the only human being not already asleep or frozen in the ground. This type of darkness does things to the mind. The psychological literature on extreme isolation wouldn't be formally compiled for generations, but the mountain men of the 1830s were unwitting subjects in a vast, uncontrolled experiment on what happens to human consciousness when stripped of normal social inputs for months at a time. Ethan notices changes in himself, though he doesn't have vocabulary to describe them precisely. His sense of time becomes elastic. Days blend together when they're all structurally identical. Wake fire, chores, fire, sleep, fire, repeat. He marks his calendar religiously, but sometimes he finds himself staring at marks, counting them twice, uncertain whether today is the 47th day of winter or the 48th. His internal monologue, normally a quiet background process, becomes louder. He catches himself having conversations with absent people, arguments with men he hasn't seen in months, elaborate explanations of his experiences to audiences that don't exist. At first, this disturbs him. Is this how madness begins? But he eventually accepts it as normal. The mind needs conversation. If no other person is available, it will create conversations from memory and imagination. He talks to fire. Come on now, catch, that's it. Good. As if fire were a horse being trained or a dog being coaxed. Fire doesn't care, obviously. But the talking helps him feel less alone, more connected to the world of cause and effect. He talks to the cabin itself. Hold together now. I know it's cold, but you've weathered worse. Cabin doesn't respond, except through its constant creaking and shifting, but those sounds begin to feel like communication. A particularly loud crack in a wall log. I'm adjusting, but I'm fine. The whistle of wind through a new gap. Pay attention here. I need work. Most troublingly, he sometimes talks to people who aren't there and momentarily forgets they aren't there. He'll turn to ask a question and be genuinely startled to find himself alone. These moments are brief but unsettling. They suggest the barrier between memory and present perception is becoming permeable, that his brain is compensating for isolation by occasionally hallucinating company. He's heard stories from other mountain men about this phenomenon. Jim Bridger, one of the most experienced trappers in the Rockies, admits openly to having had a companion through an entire winter, a perfect conversationalist, helpful, pleasant company, who didn't exist. Bridger laughs about it now, but during the experience, he was completely convinced the man was real. The key Ethan has learned is to maintain awareness. When he catches himself talking to absent people, he stops, acknowledges what's happening, and reorients himself to reality. I'm alone. It's winter. Cabin is solid. I'm fine. These verbal reminders help anchor his consciousness in present, rather than letting it drift into comfortable delusions. Sleep brings its own psychological challenges. Dreams, as mentioned earlier, are vivid and often disturbing. But there's also sleep paralysis, those terrifying moments between waking and sleeping when consciousness returns, but body remains immobile. In summer, sleep paralysis is merely unpleasant. In winter, trapped in a dark cabin with cold pressing against walls and fire crackling with sounds that could be anything, sleep paralysis becomes genuinely frightening. Ethan has experienced it perhaps a dozen times, awakening to find himself unable to move. Breathing, feeling restricted, dark shapes seeming to move at vision's edges. His rational mind knows what's happening. His brain has woken while body's sleep paralysis mechanism is still engaged, and his visual cortex is filling in ambiguous darkness with threatening forms. But knowing this doesn't make the experience less terrifying in the moment. He's learned to focus on moving his fingers first. This breaks the paralysis faster, and to breathe slowly, waiting it out. Darkness also amplifies every sound. During day, sounds are contextualized by vision. You hear a crack, see a branch breaking under snow weight, and cause-effect relationship is immediately clear. At night, that same crack is ambiguous. Is it a branch, a tree falling? Something walking outside cabin? An axe blow from someone or something approaching? Ethan has developed a library of sounds and their meanings through experience. The way logs in walls crack at certain temperatures. the particular whistle wind makes through specific gaps, the sound of snow sliding off roof in a small avalanche. The difference between a pine bough breaking under snow weight and something larger moving through forest. But there are still sounds he can't identify. Occasional thumps against cabin wall that have no obvious source. Scraping sounds that could be wind-blown branches or could be something else. Once a sound like human footsteps approaching the door, stopping just outside, then retreating. He lay in bed for an hour, rifle in hand, waiting for something. Nothing came. In the morning, there were no tracks in snow. Had he imagined it? Dreamed it while thinking he was awake? He still doesn't know. This is the price of isolation. Certainty becomes negotiable. When you're the only witness to your own experience, when there's no one to confirm or deny what you perceived, reality itself becomes slightly elastic. Darkness also removes visual stimulation, and human brain craves stimulation. Without it, brain starts generating its own. Ethan sees things in firelight shadows that aren't there, faces figures movement at vision's edge that vanishes when he looks directly. This is called pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random data, but knowing the term doesn't make the faces less unsettling when they appear. He's also noticed changes in his perception of time within single evenings. An hour can feel like 10 minutes, or like 3 hours depending on his mental state. When he's engaged in a task, repairing equipment, reading planning, time contracts. When he's simply waiting for water to boil, for fire to need tending, for sleep to come, time dilates unbearably. The worst moments are when the combination of darkness, isolation, cold, and fatigue converge into something that feels almost existential. Moments when he lies in bed, listening to wind, and thinks, why? Why am I here? What am I accomplishing? I could be in Pittsburgh, warm, surrounded by people living a normal life. Instead, I'm alone in a box of wood on the side of a mountain, fighting to not freeze to death. These moments of doubt are dangerous. They undermine motivation, sap, will make continued effort feel pointless. Ethan has learned to counter them with a simple mental technique. He lists things he's grateful for. I have shelter. Many men have frozen to death with no shelter at all. I have food. Zebulon Pike starved while I have jerky and cornmeal. I have fire. Fire is life, and mine is burning right now. I have health. No injuries, no illness, all my fingers and toes intact. I chose this. I'm not trapped by circumstance, but by choice, and I can choose differently when spring comes. The listing doesn't make doubt vanish, but it provides counterweight. It reminds him of agency, of the difference between suffering imposed and hardship chosen. There's a psychological category between these. Chosen hardship is more bearable than random suffering because it has meaning, even if that meaning is simply because I wanted to. Another psychological effect of prolonged darkness and isolation is a kind of hypersensitivity that develops. During day when he's active, when there's work to do, his emotions are stable, functional. But in darkness, his emotions become more intense, less filtered. A small frustration, jerky that's too tough, coffee that's too weak, can provoke disproportionate anger. A memory of kindness from years ago can bring him close to tears. He's learned not to trust these intense emotional responses. They're artifacts of isolation rather than true signals about what matters. When spring comes and he's around people again, these same triggers won't affect him nearly as strongly. Darkness amplifies feelings the way a cave amplifies sound, not changing the fundamental note, but making it seem overwhelming. There's also the phenomenon he thinks of as the nothing. Not despair, not fear, not any particular emotion, just a grey emptiness, a sense of being disconnected from everything, including himself. These episodes are mercifully brief, usually lasting an hour or less. But during them, he feels like he's watching his own life from outside, detached, uninvested in whether he survives or not. These are the most dangerous mental states because they undermine will to maintain routines. If you don't care whether you live or die, why bother checking door bar? Why feed fire carefully? Why do any of the 100 small maintenance tasks that survival requires? Ethan fights these episodes by forcing himself through his routines, regardless of how he feels. Action precedes motivation, he's learned. Do the thing even when you don't want to, and the wanting often follows. But perhaps the strangest psychological effect is this. Sometimes darkness becomes comfortable. Not pleasant, but familiar in a way that's almost reassuring. Constant vigilance relaxes into practiced competence. Isolation transforms from loneliness into solitude. There are moments, brief but real, when Ethan lies in his bed surrounded by darkness and feels something close to contentment. These moments trouble him more than fear or doubt, because they suggest he's adapting too well to circumstances that should remain uncomfortable. He worries that he's becoming someone who prefers isolation to company, darkness to light. He worries that when spring comes and human interaction becomes possible again, he won't remember how to do it, won't want to do it. This is how men become legends in these mountains, not through dramatic deeds, but through gradual transformation into something slightly other than fully human. Men who spend too many winters alone and emerge changed in ways that make them unsuited for normal life. Men who eventually stop returning to civilization at all, who live and die in their remote cabins, whose stories are told at rendezvous camps in tones that mix admiration with unease. Ethan doesn't want to become one of those men, but he can feel the pull of it, the seductive simplicity of a life reduced to immediate physical survival, stripped of all the complex social negotiations that make human civilization simultaneously powerful and exhausting. So he maintains his rituals, not just for physical survival, but for psychological survival. Calendar marks are proof that time is moving forward. Recited multiplication tables are proof that his mind still works in civilized ways. Reading of Shakespeare is proof that he still values things beyond warmth and food. These small acts are resistance against darkness, not just outside cabin, but inside himself. As night deepens and sleep approaches, Ethan performs one final ritual. He says out loud, speaking to darkness and fire and himself, "My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Today is December 19th, 1837. I'm alive. I'm well. Tomorrow I'll wake and I'll do this again." The words hang in air for a moment, then fade. Outside, darkness continues, patient and persistent. Inside, a man sleeps defended by nothing more than logs, and will and the thin faith that dawn as always will eventually come. To understand Ethan's isolation is to understand the historical moment he inhabits, a brief, violent, consequential period when men like him were the vanguard of American expansion into territories so wild that calling them territories felt like wishful thinking. The Rocky Mountain fur trade from roughly 1825 to 1840 was driven by a seemingly absurd economic reality. Beaver hats were high fashion in European and American cities. Specifically, hats made from beaver felt, the dense underfur that beavers grow beneath their waterproof guard hairs. This felt was perfect for creating durable water-resistant hats, and demand was insatiable. A single beaver pelt, properly trapped and preserved, might sell for $6 at Rendezvous, the annual gathering where mountain men traded their year's catch to company representatives. $6 doesn't sound impressive until you realize that a laborer in Pittsburgh might earn 50 cents for a 12-hour workday. A successful trapper could catch 40 or 50 beaver in a season. The mathematics become clear. A single winter in the mountains could earn more than 2 years of factory work. Of course, the calculation ignores the 1 in 5 mortality rate, the equipment costs, the extreme hardship, and the fact that the fashion for beaver hats would collapse within 20 years, making the entire industry obsolete. But young men in the 1830s didn't have perfect foresight. They had adventure opportunity and the chance to escape whatever circumstances had made civilization feel like a trap. Ethan left Pittsburgh in 1834. He was 25 years old, had worked in a steel mill since age 14, and had exactly $43 saved. He used 20 of it to buy passage on a boat heading up the Missouri River, 10 for basic trapping supplies, and kept 13 for contingencies. By the time he reached Fort Union, the major trading post at the confluence of the Missouri and Yellowstone rivers, the $13 was gone, spent on food and additional gear. At Fort Union, he met the real mountain men. They were immediately recognizable leather clothing, dark with grease and smoke, elaborate beards, a kind of coiled readiness in how they moved, as if constantly prepared for violence or flight. They spoke in a mixture of English, French, and various Native American languages, sprinkling in words that seemed invented until you realized they described things civilized language didn't have terms for. These men were walking encyclopedias of survival knowledge, and they had a culture all their own. They valued independence above all else, but paradoxically understood that survival often required cooperation. They were simultaneously egalitarian. A man was judged by his competence, not his background, and brutally hierarchical, where veterans commanded absolute respect, and newcomers were hazed mercilessly until they proved themselves. Ethan's education began immediately. An older trapper named Jeremiah Thompson, who'd been working the Rockies since 1828, took Ethan under his wing primarily to have someone to order around. But in the process, Jeremiah taught him everything that matters. First rule. Jeremiah said, spitting tobacco juice into the fire. The mountains don't give a damn about you. Not your dreams, not your plans, not your intentions. You can do everything right and still freeze to death because a storm came up unexpected. You can do everything wrong and survive because you got lucky. But luck runs out, and doing things right improves your odds. That's all we got, improved odds. Jeremiah taught him where to build a cabin near water, but not too near because spring floods. South-facing, if possible, for solar gain. In a drawer that's protected from wind, but not so deep that cold air pools. Near timber, but not so close that a forest fire becomes an immediate threat. He taught him about fire, how to build one in wind, rain, snow, how to start one with flint and steel, with a bow drill if necessary, with a fire piston if you could trade for one, how to maintain one overnight, how to read smoke color for information about wood quality and combustion efficiency. He taught him about cold, the difference between cold that's merely uncomfortable and cold that kills. How to recognize the early signs of hypothermia in yourself. Confusion, slurred speech loss, of fine motor control. How to rewarm someone who's gone hypothermic without killing them. Slow external warming. Warm liquids, if conscious, never alcohol despite the folk belief. How to treat frostbite. Gradual rewarming, never rubbing acceptance that lost tissue is gone. He taught him about animals, how to tell fresh bear scat from old by smell and consistency. How to walk in elk territory without spooking them. How to set a beaver trap so the animal drowns quickly rather than suffering. How to skin a deer in 15 minutes flat. Which animals could be eaten and which carried parasites that would make you violently ill. He taught him about Native Americans with whom mountain men had complex relationships that ranged from deep friendship to total warfare depending on tribe location and circumstances. Some tribes will trade with you, even help you through winter if you treat them right. The Ute are usually friendly if you respect their territory. The Blackfoot, though, they've decided we're the enemy, and they're not wrong about that, given what we're doing to their beaver populations and what other white men have done to them elsewhere. Know who you're dealing with and never ever assume. But most of all, Jeremiah taught him about isolation. You're gonna be alone for months, he said, and alone does things to your head. You'll talk to yourself, have conversations with people who ain't there, see things in shadows. That's all normal. The thing to watch for is when you stop caring, when you wake up and think, why bother? That's when men die. They stop maintaining their fire properly, stop checking their traps, stop eating enough, just slowly wind down like a clock that ain't been wound. You feel that happening. You do anything to break the pattern. Sing out loud, count your possessions, walk in circles around your cabin. Don't let the nothing take over. Ethan absorbed all of it, storing each piece of advice like a squirrel storing nuts. When he finally struck out on his own in autumn of 1835, establishing his current cabin in the nameless valley, Jeremiah's parting words were simple. You'll probably die this winter. Most first-timers do. But if you survive, you'll know you're tougher than you thought, and that's worth knowing. Ethan survived. Barely. That first winter was an education in suffering that made every subsequent winter feel manageable by comparison. He made mistakes, ran out of firewood in February, and had to chop more in dangerous cold. Improperly stored food that froze solid and was nearly impossible to use. Didn't account for snow depth and got trapped in his cabin for 3 days with no clear path to his woodpile. But he learned, adjusted, adapted. The mountain man culture had unwritten rules that everyone learned or died. Never trust a thaw. Warm weather in winter is temporary and usually followed by worse cold. Cache your supplies. Keep backup food hidden outside your main cabin in case of fire or theft. Know 3 ways to make fire. If your flint breaks, you need alternatives immediately. Respect every native person until they prove otherwise, and even then understand that their hostility might be justified by things other white men did. Check your traps every day if possible. A beaver left too long can be scavenged or damaged. Never waste. Every part of an animal has use: meat, hide, sinew bones, even bladder for water storage. Trust, mountain man gossip. If multiple people say a pass is suicide in winter, it probably is. Keep your word. If you promise to meet someone in spring, meet them. Your reputation is your only currency. Help men who are truly in need. You might need help someday, but shoot men who steal from you, because that's not just theft. It's attempted murder by removing survival resources. The rendezvous, the annual summer gathering, was where this culture crystallized. For a few weeks, each summer, hundreds of mountain men would converge on a predetermined location, usually a valley with good water and grazing for horses. Company representatives would arrive with supplies for trade. Native Americans would come to trade and socialize. There would be drinking, gambling, storytelling fights, romance business deals, and a general atmosphere of controlled chaos. Ethan attended his first rendezvous in summer of 1836. It was overwhelming, hundreds of people, after months of seeing none, constant noise, after endless silence, the smell of unwashed humans and horses and leather all mixed together. Men he'd heard of only as legends were actually there. Jim Bridger, Thomas Fitzpatrick, Kit Carson, men whose exploits were already being exaggerated into mythology, even while they were still living them. He traded his beaver pelts for supplies, coffee, gunpowder, lead for bullets. 2 new steel traps, a pound of tobacco, even though he didn't smoke because tobacco was tradable currency. 3 wool blankets to replace ones that were wearing out, a supply of salt cornmeal beans, and a precious luxury, a small mirror. The mirror seemed frivolous, but Jeremiah had insisted. "You need to see yourself," he explained. "After months alone, you start to forget you got a face, that you're a physical person in the world. The mirror reminds you." Ethan also listened to stories. The stories of mountain men were part entertainment, part education, part warning. Story of the man who died because his powder got wet and he couldn't shoot the elk he'd been tracking for 2 days, ultimately starving. The story of the man who survived being mauled by a grizzly by playing dead for 4 hours while the bear periodically checked on him. The story of the man who lost all his toes to frostbite but fashioned wooden replacements and kept trapping for another 5 years. These stories weren't idle gossip. They were the community's way of sharing survival knowledge. Each story contained lessons. Keep your powder dry. Don't run from bears. Protect your extremities. Improvise when necessary. The historical record of this period is fragmentary. Many mountain men were illiterate or barely literate. The ones who kept journals often wrote tersely. Nov. 14. Cold. Caught 2 beavers. Their inner lives, their thoughts during those long, isolated winters, were rarely recorded. What we have is mostly gleaned from stories they told at rendezvous accounts, written by visitors to their camps, and the physical evidence they left behind: cabins, traps, cached supplies, and occasionally bodies. What's clear from available evidence is that this lifestyle took a severe psychological toll. Many mountain men who survived the physical dangers found themselves unable to reintegrate into civilization. They became permanent wanderers, uncomfortable in towns, unable to maintain relationships, only truly content when alone in wilderness. Some became legends precisely because they disappeared. Men who went into the mountains and were never seen again, leaving only stories about where they might have gone, what they might have found. The mountains collected these men and their secrets, keeping both. Ethan understands he's part of this tradition now, whether he intended to be or not. He came to the mountains to escape the steel mill, to find freedom, to test himself. He's found all those things, but he's also found isolation that sometimes feels less like freedom and more like imprisonment in a cell made of trees and snow. The question that haunts him during long winter nights is simple. When spring comes and he could leave, will he? Or has he become the thing he came here to find? A man who only makes sense in extremity, who's been shaped by isolation until normal life no longer fits. He doesn't know yet. For now, he survives. That's enough. It has to be. On the 73rd day of winter, something changes. Ethan is checking his trapline along the creek. 3 traps set in slow pools where beaver sometimes work even in winter. Its afternoon temperature may be 10 below a clear sky that hurts to look at directly because sun reflects off snow with painful intensity. He's approaching the second trap location when he sees them. 4 wolves watching him from maybe 50 yards away. He stops immediately, hand moving to his rifle, but not raising it. Not yet. Wolves are generally wary of humans, avoid confrontation, and these 4 are just standing there, watching. The largest, a grey wolf with fur the colour of smoke rising from green wood, is clearly the leader. Ethan can tell by how the others orient toward him, take behavioural cues from his posture. This wolf is massive, probably 120 pounds, with scars on his muzzle that speak of fights survived. The other 3 are smaller, 2 females and 1 younger male. A small pack, which means they've either split from a larger group or lost members to territory disputes or starvation. Ethan and the lead wolf lock eyes. This is the moment that decides whether what happens next is violence or something else. The wolf doesn't snarl, doesn't show teeth, just looks, assesses. Some calculation happening behind those amber eyes that Ethan can't quite read. Then the wolf does something unexpected. It sits. Just sits down in the snow like a dog waiting for dinner. The other wolves follow suit. They sit there, all 4 of them, about 50 yards away, watching him. Ethan lowers his rifle slightly. This isn't threat behavior. He doesn't know what it is, but it's not threat. He carefully backs away, returns to his cabin, his mind spinning with questions. Wolves don't do this. They avoid humans. They certainly don't approach and sit down as if waiting for something. The next day, same trap check, same 4 wolves. This time they're a little closer. 40 yards. Same behavior, watching, waiting, the big male sitting calmly like he's expecting Ethan to do something. Ethan is deeply unsettled. This violates everything he knows about wolf behavior. On the 3rd day, he brings an offering. It's foolish, he knows, but curiosity and something else, loneliness maybe, drives him. He has several pounds of elk meat freezing in his storage. He cuts off a chunk, maybe 2 pounds, and when he reaches his trap, check location, and sees the wolves waiting, 30 yards now, he tosses the meat into the snow between them. Then he backs away, watches. The big male approaches the meat slowly, sniffs it, picks it up delicately in his jaws, and carries it back to the pack. They share it, tearing chunks the social hierarchy clear in who eats first. And then the big male looks at Ethan again. And in that look, Ethan sees something he didn't expect: intelligence. Not animal cunning, actual intelligence, a kind of thinking happening behind those eyes. This becomes routine. Every day Ethan brings meat. Every day the wolves take it. The distance slowly closes. 30 yards becomes 20, becomes 15, becomes 10. After 2 weeks, the big male is close enough that Ethan could hit him with a thrown rock. He names them. The big male, Smoke. Not just for the colour of his fur, but because, like smoke, he seems to drift in and out of visibility, appearing and disappearing at will. The younger male, Notch, for a distinctive notch in his left ear, probably from a fight. The two females shade and echo names that feel right for reasons he can't articulate. And then, on the 91st day of winter, everything shifts again. Ethan is returning to his cabin just before dusk, his trap check complete. No catches, winter beaver are scarce. He's maybe 200 yards from his cabin when he hears it, a sound that stops him dead. Not wolves, bears. Two juvenile grizzlies, probably siblings who haven't separated yet, are at his cabin. They're trying to get inside, drawn by the smell of his stored food. One is clawing at the door. The other is up on the roof, testing its weight on the shakes. Grizzlies in winter should be hibernating. But young bears sometimes emerge from dens during warm snaps, disoriented and hungry. And these two are clearly hungry. Ethan's rifle is loaded, but 2 bullets against 2 grizzlies in a situation where he has to kill both before either reaches him, the mathematics are bad. A wounded grizzly is a dead man. If he shoots, he has to be certain, and certainty is hard when your target is moving and your hands are shaking with adrenaline. He's calculating odds, considering whether to hide and hope they leave when the wolves appear. All 4 of them moving silent as smoke itself materializing from the tree line. They position themselves between Ethan and the bears, and Smoke, the big male, does something extraordinary. He howls. Not a hunting howl, not a territorial howl, a specific pitch and pattern that Ethan has never heard before. The other wolves join in, creating a chorus that echoes off the valley walls, amplified by snow and forest, until it sounds like dozens of wolves instead of 4. The bears stop. Look at the wolves. The mathematics shift. 2 juvenile bears against 4 wolves. The bears would probably win, but not without severe injury. And in winter, injury means death. The bears retreat, lumbering back into the forest, disappearing into pine shadows. The wolves remain positioned between Ethan and where the bears vanished for a full minute. Then Smoke looks back at Ethan. One more time, holds his gaze, and leads his pack away into the forest. Ethan stands in the snow heart hammering, trying to process what just happened. The only explanation that makes sense is impossible. The wolves just protected him. That night, sleepless, Ethan considers options. He's heard stories, rumors, really, from various Native American tribes about wolves, who choose certain humans who form bonds that transcend the normal animal-human relationship. The Ute people, whose territory extends into these mountains, have entire spiritual traditions around what they call wolf medicine. In their understanding, wolves can be our teachers, guides, protectors. A wolf choosing to walk with a human is considered a great honor, a sign that the person possesses certain qualities: courage, loyalty, the ability to survive in harsh conditions. Jeremiah Thompson had mentioned this once dismissively. Indians got all kinds of stories about animals being sacred. It's superstition mostly. Wolves are wolves. They'll eat you if they're hungry enough. But what Ethan is experiencing doesn't fit within normal animal behavior. Wolves don't do this, unless they do. And centuries of European-descended people killing wolves on sight has prevented anyone from seeing what wolves might be like if they viewed humans as something other than threat. Over the following weeks, the relationship deepens. Ethan continues to leave food, but not every day. He doesn't have enough to spare. The wolves understand somehow. They come some days, not others. When they come, they wait patiently for whatever he can provide, but they also start giving back. One morning, he finds a freshly killed rabbit outside his cabin door. Not eaten, just left. an offering clearly. A few days later, he's checking traps and finds one has caught a beaver. But the beaver is already dead, throat torn out. The trap is undamaged. The beaver was killed by something else. And then, what placed in the trap? That makes no sense. Unless the wolves understood that this is how Ethan gets food and decided to help. He's careful not to over-romanticize this. These aren't pets. They're wild apex predators with their own needs and survival priorities. But something is happening here that defies simple categorization. The most dramatic incident comes in late February, day 141 of winter. Ethan has ventured farther than usual from his cabin chasing signs of elk. The temperature is relatively mild, only 5 below, and he's gotten careless focused on tracking. He doesn't notice the weather change until it's too late. The Chinook wind that's been warming things for 2 days has reversed, and Arctic air is plunging south. Temperature drops 20 degrees in 30 minutes. Snow starts falling hard, driven by wind that turns visibility to near zero. A whiteout. Ethan is perhaps a mile from his cabin, and he immediately realizes his mistake. In a whiteout, direction becomes impossible to determine. Wind shifts constantly. Snow covers tracks within minutes. People get lost and wander until they freeze sometimes, dying within sight of safety they can't see. He stops moving. This is the first rule of whiteout survival. Stop shelter if possible. Wait. But there's no shelter here. He's in the middle of forest with no cave, no rock overhang, nothing. His options are try to build a snow shelter and hope the storm passes before his body heat is exhausted, or try to reach the cabin and probably fail. And then smoke appears. Just materializes out of the swirling white so close, Ethan nearly shoots him in pure startled reaction. The wolf barks once, a sharp imperative sound, then turns and walks a few steps. Stops, looks back. The message is unmistakable. Follow me. Ethan follows. The wolf moves slowly enough that Ethan can keep up, occasionally stopping to ensure he's still there. The other wolves appear and disappear in the storm, visible as dark shapes for moments before being swallowed by white again. Time becomes meaningless. Ethan has no idea how long they walk. 20 minutes. An hour he's shaking with cold lips. Blue fingers losing feeling despite his gloves. The edge of hypothermia. And then, through the white dark shapes, his cabin. The wolves led him home. Smoke sits in the snow outside the cabin door one final time, watching Ethan stumble inside. Their eyes meet through falling snow. Some acknowledgement passes between them that's beyond language. Then the wolf vanishes into the storm. Inside, Ethan builds his fire strips off his frozen clothing, wraps in blankets and shakes for an hour before warmth finally returns. The fire crackles. The wind howls. The cabin creaks. And Ethan knows, absolutely knows, that he would be dead right now if not for the wolves. The question is, why? Why would wild wolves help a human? What evolutionary or social mechanism explains this behavior? He has no answers, only gratitude and profound confusion. The anthropological record contains scattered reports of similar phenomena. Native American oral histories include numerous accounts of wolf-human relationships that seem to transcend normal predator-human dynamics. The Chippewa people tell stories of wolves who guided lost hunters home through blizzards. The Pawnee have legends of wolves who shared kills with starving families during harsh winters. European explorers occasionally report encounters with wolves that don't fit expected patterns. wolves that followed them without attacking wolves that seemed to provide warnings or assistance. Modern science would later discover that wolves are capable of remarkable social intelligence. They can read human facial expressions and gestures respond to pointing, something even chimpanzees struggle with, and form long-term memories of specific humans. Dogs, after all, are domesticated wolves, and their capacity for bonding with humans had to originate somewhere in their ancestral species. But that doesn't fully explain what happens in Ethan's Valley during the winter of 1837-38. What happens there is something rarer, more mysterious, more profound than simple learned behavior. What happens is relationship, actual relationship based on mutual aid recognition, and something that feels uncomfortably like friendship. For the rest of the winter, the wolves are a constant presence. Not every day, but regularly. They seem to understand Ethan's routines appear when he's checking traps, occasionally leave kills outside his cabin. He continues to share meat when he has it to spare. Most remarkably, they begin to hunt for him in a way. When elk are in the valley, the wolves will drive them toward Ethan's location, allowing him shots he wouldn't otherwise have. Is this intentional cooperation, or is it just that wolves hunting and a human hunter in the same vicinity sometimes have aligned interests Ethan doesn't know? What he does know is that by the time spring arrives, he's no longer alone. He has companions, strange, wild, dangerous companions who could kill him with ease, but choose not to. When the snow finally begins to melt in earnest and the valley opens up again, revealing ground that's been buried for 5 months, the wolves come one final time, all 4 of them, sitting in a semicircle outside his cabin in the weak April sun. Smoke looks at him the way he looked at him that first day. Some assessment, some acknowledgement. Then the pack rises and walks away into the forest, heading north toward higher elevations where prey is starting to move into summer ranges. Ethan watches them go. He knows he'll probably never see them again. Wolves are territorial and migratory. Whatever alignment of circumstances brought them together is ending. But he also knows that what happened in this valley during this winter is something he'll never fully understand or be able to explain to others. He'll try years later at rendezvous camps to tell the story. Other mountain men will listen skeptical, probably thinking he embellished out of loneliness or went slightly mad from isolation. But it happened. He has the memory of it clear as any memory he's ever made. And on certain quiet evenings for the rest of his life, when he's sitting by a fire somewhere in the wilderness, he'll hear wolves howling in the distance. And he'll wonder if one of those voices is smoke somewhere out there in the darkness, remembering the winter when wolf and man decided to help each other survive. The question of why remains unanswered. Perhaps there is no why. Perhaps some connections exist beyond explanation, beyond reason in territories where logic doesn't apply. The mountains keep many secrets. This is one of them. Winter creates a paradox. You're most alone precisely when you'd most benefit from company. The cold that makes human warmth precious is the same cold that makes human company scarce. Ethan feels this acutely as spring's first hints begin to appear in early March. Days grow incrementally longer. Snowmelt begins during the warmest afternoon hours, though it refreezes each night. Light changes quality, becomes brighter, less filtered through atmospheric ice crystals. And he realizes how profoundly bone-deeply lonely he's been. The wolves helped. Having any living presence that responded to his existence, that seemed to value his survival, made a difference. But wolves aren't people. They can't talk, can't share stories, can't laugh at jokes or commiserate about hardship. The companionship they offered, while real, was ultimately limited. What Ethan craves now, with an intensity that surprises him, is human connection, conversation. The simple pleasure of words exchanged with someone who understands language the same way, who shares cultural references, who can laugh at the same absurdities. He finds himself rehearsing conversations with absent people. Not the brief functional self-talk he uses for maintaining sanity, but actual dialogues. He'll imagine meeting another trapper on the trail, and they'll have elaborate discussions about nothing in particular. Weather beaver behavior, quality of coffee. These imagined conversations are simultaneously comforting and disturbing. Comforting because they scratch the social itch. Disturbing because they highlight how desperate that itch has become. The mountain man culture had ways of addressing this. The trappers who survived multiple winters weren't necessarily the toughest or most skilled. They were often the ones who maintained some form of social connection during isolation. Some took Native American wives, forming households that provided both practical support and emotional anchor. Some formed partnerships, two men sharing a cabin and chores trading off trap-checking duties and providing conversation during long evenings. Ethan has done neither. He chose solitude, and solitude is what he got. But there's a difference between chosen solitude and enforced isolation. Ethan chose to live alone in the wilderness. He didn't choose the specific quality of loneliness that winter creates. The way it magnifies every silent moment, every unshared experience, every thought that would benefit from another perspective. Research that wouldn't be conducted for another century and a half would demonstrate that human isolation has measurable negative effects on health. Isolated individuals experience higher stress hormone levels, disrupted sleep, compromised immune function, even changes in gene expression. Humans are social species. Extended isolation isn't just uncomfortable. It's contrary to our biological design. Ethan doesn't have this scientific vocabulary, but he knows the feeling. There's a hollow space that food, warmth, and safety don't fill. A need for social warmth that's as real as need for physical warmth. In the Native American cultures around him, this is understood intuitively. The Ute people have elaborate social structures specifically designed to prevent isolation. Extended families live together. Elders are integrated into daily life. Children are raised communally. The idea of a person choosing to live alone for months would seem bizarre, even unhealthy. When Ethan has interacted with Ute people at trading posts, he's noticed how tactile they are. Hands on shoulders during conversation. Children constantly touching adults. A casual physical closeness that's common in communal cultures, but rare in the more individualistic Anglo-American culture he comes from. He's come to understand that touch is its own form of warmth, not metaphorically, literally. Human physical contact triggers oxytocin release, reduces cortisol, lowers blood pressure, improves mood. Touch is a biological need, like sleep or food. He hasn't been touched by another human in 7 months. This deprivation creates a kind of skin hunger, an actual craving for physical contact that has nothing to do with sexuality or romance, and everything to do with being a mammal that evolved in social groups, where touch was constant and comforting. The lack of it makes him notice touch in ways he never did before. The way blankets press against his skin when he's in bed. The way his own hands feel when he clasps them together. Even wind against his face becomes a kind of substitute, a sensation that reminds him his body has surfaces that interact with the world. Some mountain men he knows develop elaborate relationships with animals, partially because animals provide touch. A dog, a horse, even a beaver pelt being worked. These provide tactile input that isolated humans crave. Ethan doesn't have any domesticated animals, which makes his interaction with the wolves even more significant. When Smoke sat 10 feet away watching him, there was an element of shared space, of social proximity, that satisfied something deep and wordless. As March progresses and the valley begins its slow emergence from winter, Ethan finds himself anticipating rendezvous with an intensity that borders on desperate. The gathering won't happen until July, still 4 months away. But he's already planning what he'll trade, what supplies he needs, what questions he'll ask about other trappers' winters. Most of all, he's anticipating conversation, hours of it, days of it, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories, arguing about trivial details, laughing at shared jokes, the social feast after months of social famine. But there's also anxiety. Will he remember how to be social? Will months of isolation have made him strange, awkward, unable to read social cues? Some mountain men emerge from winter visibly changed, talking too much, or not enough, standing too close, or too far, missing jokes, misreading expressions. The social muscles atrophy when not used, and re-engaging them can be painful. Ethan practices in the privacy of his cabin, rehearsing small talk, remembering how to laugh at appropriate moments, working on his facial expressions. It feels ridiculous, but he knows it's necessary. The question of sleeping arrangements comes to his mind often during these late winter weeks. In communal societies, and even in earlier phases of his own culture, people slept together far more often than modern Western culture does. Families in one room, travelers in shared beds at inns, soldiers in barracks, ship crews in hammocks stacked close. Sleeping together provided warmth, multiple bodies generating heat in a shared space. But it also provided security, comfort, and the assurance that if something went wrong during the night, help was immediate. Solo sleep is a relatively recent invention, one that's predicated on having reliable heating, secure structures, and the luxury of privacy. Ethan's solo sleeping platform, warm enough with his layers and heated stones, is nevertheless lonely in a way he never fully appreciated until experiencing it for months on end. The sounds he makes, breathing, moving, occasionally talking in his sleep, echo in empty space. No one else's breath mingles with his. No other body heat contributes to the microclimate. He's a single point of warmth in a cold room, and the isolation of that is sometimes harder than the cold itself. He imagines sometimes what it would be like to have a companion. Not romantically, just another person. 2 people sharing this cabin would use less firewood per person because shared body heat is efficient. Would have richer conversations during long evenings. Would take turns with difficult or dangerous chores. Would provide backup if injury occurred. But companionship is also commitment, responsibility, negotiation. Someone else's needs, preferences, quirks, flaws. Ethan chose solitude partially to escape exactly that kind of continuous social navigation. The paradox is that now, 7 months deep into the solitude he chose, he'd trade a significant portion of his independence for just one evening of companionship. This realization troubles him. It suggests his understanding of what he wanted was incomplete, that he was running from something rather than towards something. That perhaps the freedom he sought was more accurately described as avoidance. As April arrives and snow becomes more slush than solid pack, as the creek begins to flow freely again and migrating birds return with their noise and motion, Ethan stands outside his cabin one evening and looks at the smoke rising from his chimney, the only human-made smoke visible in any direction. He's survived. Against statistics that said otherwise, he's made it through winter intact, healthy, successful by any objective measure. But success feels incomplete. He's proven he can live alone. The question now is, should he? The mountains don't answer. They rarely do. But the question hangs in the air along with the smoke waiting for response he doesn't yet have. For tonight, he goes back inside, tends his fire, eats his simple meal, performs his routines. Tomorrow the snow will melt a little more, days will grow a little longer, spring will arrive incrementally, and with it the possibility of human contact again. For now, that possibility is enough to sustain him. For now. It's late April now, day 214 since the first snow. The worst of winter is definitively over, though nights are still cold, still requiring fire, still demanding vigilance. But something has shifted. The quality of darkness has changed. It's no longer the absolute oppressive blackness of January, but something softer, less hostile. The moon, when it's visible, illuminates snow-covered landscape with enough light to see shapes, movement, the outlines of trees. Tonight, Ethan performs his evening routine one more time. It's become so automatic that he barely thinks about individual actions. They flow from one to another like a dance perfected through hundreds of repetitions. Fire built high, water melted, food prepared, clothes dried, equipment checked, heated stones wrapped, door secured, rifle loaded, calendar marked. He pauses at the calendar counting. Tomorrow will be mark number 215. Roughly 7 months since winter began. Probably another month before the high passes clear enough for travel. But the siege is effectively over. He's won. Survivors don't celebrate. They just note the passage and continue. Ethan sits on his sleeping platform, not yet under covers, and allows himself a moment of reflection. This is dangerous. Reflection can spiral into regret or fear, but he feels stable enough tonight to risk it. What has winter taught him? That cold is patient, but not malicious. It doesn't hate him. It just is a physical reality to be understood and navigated. That isolation clarifies. Stripped of social complexity, his thoughts have a directness and simplicity that's sometimes refreshing, sometimes disturbing. That survival is mostly unglamorous. It's not heroic deeds, but small competencies repeated endlessly. That the line between sanity and madness is thinner than he'd believed, and maintaining sanity requires conscious effort. That loneliness and solitude are different things, and he's experienced both in their purest forms. That connection, whether with wolves or the memory of human companionship, is a need as fundamental as warmth. That he's stronger than he thought, but also more fragile in ways he didn't anticipate. These lessons sit in his mind, not yet fully integrated, but present. Seeds that will continue growing long after winter ends. He thinks about the wolves, wonders where they are now, whether smoke is hunting in moonlight somewhere, whether the pack is still together. He feels gratitude for their presence, even if he never fully understood it. He thinks about the cabin, this small fortress of logs and mud and determination that's kept him alive through months that should have killed him. It's been home prison and sanctuary all at once. When he leaves in May or June, heading to rendezvous, will he return here? Or will he choose a different valley, a different cabin, a different version of this same isolated life? He doesn't know yet. The question can wait until spring makes travel possible. For tonight, there's just this: the warmth of fire, the weight of blankets, the familiar sounds of cabins settling around him. He adds logs to the fire, watching them catch and burn. The flames dance, casting shadows that he's learned to read to find comfort in, rather than fear. The warmth pushes outward, filling the space, holding back the cold that presses against the walls. He climbs into his bed, pulls the buffalo hide up to his chin, and feels the weight of it settle over him like an old friend's embrace. His body begins the familiar process of warming, the microclimate heat accumulating under layers, cold retreating to the edges. Outside, the wind has died down. There's a quality to the silence that suggests snow falling gently, adding another inch or two to what's already there. But it's spring snow now, light and temporary, not the heavy, permanent accumulation of deep winter. Tomorrow, he'll wake, check his traps, tend his fire, count his remaining supplies. Mark another day on his calendar. The routine will continue, but with the knowledge that it's finite now. Spring is coming. Change is inevitable. For tonight, though, there's just this moment. Just the warmth and the weight and the quiet satisfaction of having survived another day. Ethan's breathing slows, deepens. His muscles relax incrementally. The cabin creaks and pops around him, sounds he knows as well as his own heartbeat. Sleep approaches like an old friend, gentle and inevitable. Outside, the snow continues to fall. Inside, a fire burns steady and true, and a man sleeps defended by nothing more than logs and will and the accumulated wisdom of 7 months' survival. The darkness no longer feels threatening. It feels almost peaceful. His last conscious thought before sleep takes him is simple: I made it. And then even that thought fades, and there's only the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who's earned their rest. The fire crackles softly. The wind whispers through pine trees. The valley holds its breath, waiting for spring. And winter, patient and persistent, begins its slow retreat, making way for what comes next. And that's where we'll leave him. Ethan Caldwell, sleeping peacefully through one of the last nights of winter in a small cabin high in the Rocky Mountains. History doesn't record what happened to Ethan after this particular winter. Perhaps he continued trapping for years, becoming one of the legendary figures whose name was whispered around rendezvous fires. Perhaps he eventually left the mountains, returned to civilization, tried to fit back into a world that no longer quite made sense to him. Perhaps he found a middle path guiding wagon trains through the passes when the great migrations began translating between wilderness and civilization without fully belonging to either. We do know that the beaver trade collapsed in the early 1840s as silk hats replaced beaver felt in European fashion. 3,000 mountain men found themselves suddenly obsolete, their hard-won expertise in trapping no longer economically viable. Some adapted, became guides or scouts or farmers. Others disappeared back into the mountains, choosing isolation over integration. And the wolves. Smoke and his pack, if they survived, would have faced their own challenges as settlement expanded westward. Wolves were systematically hunted, poisoned, driven to near extinction in the American West over the next century. Whether Smoke's descendants survived is unknowable, but the possibility remains that somewhere in the Rockies, wolves still remember a time when humans could be something other than enemy. What we can say with certainty is this: human beings are capable of extraordinary resilience. We can adapt to environments that should kill us. We can endure isolation that should break us. We can survive cold that should freeze us solid. But we're not meant to do it entirely alone. We need warmth, yes, but not just physical warmth. We need the warmth of connection, the warmth of purpose, the warmth that comes from belonging to something larger than ourselves. Whether that something is a community of people, a partnership with the natural world, or a simple acknowledgement that we're all in this together, all trying to make it through our own dark winters. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, in your warm bed, in your safe home with modern heating, keeping everything at a comfortable temperature, take a moment to be grateful. Not just for the physical comfort, though that's worth appreciating, but for the fact that you're here, that you're alive, that you've survived your own winters, whatever form they took. And remember that spring always comes, always has, always will. No matter how long the darkness, no matter how deep the cold, spring comes. The pass is clear, the snow melts, the creek flows free again, life returns. And those who survived the winter emerged changed, but alive, carrying lessons, written in cold and darkness, and the fierce determination to see one more dawn. Sleep well, rest deeply, and wake tomorrow ready to face whatever winters lie ahead, knowing that you carry within you the same resilience that allowed Ethan Caldwell and thousands like him to survive impossible odds. The fire burns low. The darkness is gentle now. And somewhere in the distance, if you listen carefully, you might hear it, the howl of a wolf singing to the moon, reminding us that we're never quite as alone as we think. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. I'm Peter Miller, and I'll be here whenever you need another story to help you drift away. Good night.